The document sitting on the desk of the Senate Judiciary Committee right now is not a leak. It is not opposition research. It is not a theory constructed by political opponents looking for ammunition. It is an internal FBI communication log, 43 days of time-stamped entries, user IDs, access records, and encrypted message headers that was produced through a formal congressional subpoena and verified by two independent sources inside the Department of Justice. And what that log contains is the reason that three senior FBI officials have, in the past 72 hours, quietly retained personal legal counsel. Not the Bureau's lawyers, their own lawyers. When the people who run the Federal Bureau of Investigation start hiring private attorneys, something has happened inside that building that the public statement machine has not yet caught up to. And the paper trail that triggered that decision is what we are going to walk through today, line by line, document by document, in the kind of detail that the headline coverage is not stopping to provide. Before we go any further, subscribe to the Public Record right now and hit the notification bell, because what we are about to lay out is the documented timeline of what happened inside the FBI in the first 43 days of Kash Patel's directorship. This is not speculation. This is the record, and you need to be here when the next document drops, because this story is moving fast, and every new filing changes the picture. Let us start with the setup, because context is everything here, and the mainstream coverage is presenting this story without the architecture that makes it make sense. Kash Patel was confirmed as FBI director in February 2025 by a vote of 51 to 49. His confirmation was one of the most contested in the history of the Bureau. Former FBI directors, former deputy directors, and former senior agents testified or submitted written statements expressing concern about his fitness for the role. The specific concerns raised were not about his intelligence or his loyalty to the administration. They were about a pattern of behavior documented across his prior government service, a pattern of treating institutional processes as obstacles rather than guardrails, and a pattern of using information access for purposes that critics described as political rather than investigative. The Senate confirmed him anyway, and on his first day in the building, Kash Patel made a decision that, according to the internal log, now in congressional hands, set in motion everything that followed. He changed the access protocols for the FBI's most sensitive document management system. Not the entire system, not in a way that was immediately visible, a targeted modification to the routing rules governing which officials received automatic notification when specific categories of classified documents were accessed, copied, or transferred. The modification was logged, it was time-stamped, and according to the congressional subpoena documents, it was made without the standard sign-off from the Bureau's Office of General Counsel. That single entry, Day 1, time-stamped 1432, is the first brick in the wall that the Senate Judiciary Committee is now building. Now, here is what makes this more than a procedural dispute about document routing protocols. The category of documents affected by that Day 1 modification was not random. According to sources familiar with the subpoena materials, the routing change specifically affected notification alerts for documents related to 3 ongoing federal investigations. The identities of the targets of those investigations are redacted in the publicly available portions of the subpoena response. But the categories are not redacted, and the categories tell a story that legal analysts are describing as, at minimum, a serious conflict of interest question, and at maximum, something considerably more significant. Category 1. Investigations involving individuals who held senior positions in the previous administration and who had publicly supported Patel's confirmation. Category 2. Investigations involving financial transactions connected to political action committees that had donated to campaigns aligned with the current administration's political agenda. Category 3. A specific counterintelligence file whose subject matter is still classified, but whose existence was confirmed in a separate Inspector General referral filed 6 weeks before Patel took office. When a new FBI director takes office and the first documented action on his first day is a modification that removes automatic oversight notifications for documents in exactly these three categories, the legal question is not whether that is suspicious. The legal question is whether it rises to the level of obstruction, interference with an ongoing investigation, or misuse of law enforcement authority for political purposes. The Senate Judiciary Committee believes it might. That is why the subpoena exists. That is why 3 senior FBI officials have hired private lawyers. And that is why this story matters beyond the political theater of congressional hearings. Subscribe to the Public Record if this breakdown is giving you what the nightly news is not. Hit the notification bell. Share this video with anyone who is trying to understand what is actually happening inside American institutions right now. Because what we are describing is not a partisan attack. It is a documented sequence of events that raises questions that the law requires to be answered. Let us move to day 11, because if day 1 was the first brick, day 11 is where the structure of what may have happened starts to become visible. On day 11 of Patel's directorship, a mid-level FBI analyst in the Financial Crimes Unit submitted a routine request to access a specific file within the document management system. This was not an unusual request. This analyst had accessed this file type regularly as part of their assigned caseload. The system, under the previous access protocols, would have processed the request automatically and logged it in the standard way. Under the new routing rules that Patel had implemented on day 1, the request triggered a different response. Instead of automatic approval, the request was flagged for manual review and routed to a newly created approval node within the director's office. The analyst waited. The approval did not come that day, or the next, or the day after that. According to the internal log, the request sat in the approval queue for 9 days before it was either approved or denied. The log does not show which outcome occurred because the entry after the 9-day waiting period shows the file being accessed, but the access is logged under a different user ID than the original requester. Read that again. The analyst requested access. 9 days passed. Then the file was accessed, but not by the analyst, by someone else, under a different credential. The Senate Judiciary Committee's investigators flagged this entry as a priority item in their review because what it suggests, if the log is accurate and the interpretation is correct, is that a sensitive financial crimes file was accessed by an unidentified user during a period when the original requester was being held in a bureaucratic waiting queue. Whether that access was authorized, whether it was appropriate, and whether anything in the file was viewed, copied, or any way compromised, those are the questions that investigators are now attempting to answer. And they are doing so without the cooperation of the director's office, which brings us to the obstruction dimension of this story. Here is what the obstruction argument looks like in documentary terms. The Senate Judiciary Committee issued its first formal document request to the FBI on a date that, according to the unsealed portion of the subpoena filing, was 31 days into Patel's directorship. The request was specific. It asked for the complete access logs for the document management system covering the period from Patel's first day in office through the date of the request. Standard congressional oversight. The kind of request that the FBI has complied with under both Republican and Democratic administrations as a matter of routine. The FBI's response, which arrived 8 days later, was a document that committee staff described in internal communications that were subsequently included in the subpoena filing, as non-responsive. Not incomplete, not partially responsive, non-responsive. What the FBI sent back was not the access logs. It was a summary document prepared by the director's office characterizing what the access logs contained. The committee asked for the original record. The Bureau sent an interpretation of the record prepared by the office whose conduct the committee was investigating. That response is now entered into the congressional record as Exhibit 7 in the Judiciary Committee's ongoing review, and legal analysts who have reviewed the filing describe Exhibit 7 as one of the most significant documents in the case, not because of what it says, but because of what it represents. An FBI director, when asked by the United States Senate to produce records of his own office's activities, produced instead a document written by his own office describing those activities. Former federal prosecutor and legal analyst David Loffman commented publicly on this structure. He noted that in 22 years of federal prosecution, the pattern of substituting self-authored summaries for primary records in response to investigative demands is one of the clearest signals that the primary records contain something the producing party does not want seen. Now let's talk about the 43-day mark, because it's on day 43 that the internal log produces its most significant entry, and the one that has caused the most alarm among the legal professionals who have reviewed the subpoena materials. On day 43 at 9:17 in the morning, an entry appears in the FBI internal communication system.
Let that land for a moment. The senior aide to the FBI director sent an encrypted communication to someone who was, at that exact moment, the subject of a federal counterintelligence investigation being run by the bureau that the director leads. The content of the message is not available in the unsealed portions of the subpoena response. It remains classified. But the metadata, the sender, the recipient, the timestamp, the fact that it was sent through an encrypted internal channel rather than standard official communication pathways, is in the record. And that metadata is what has caused the Inspector General's office to open a formal preliminary inquiry that, as of this week, has been upgraded from preliminary to active. An active IG inquiry is not a press release. It is not a political statement. It is a formal investigative mechanism with subpoena power, document preservation authority, and the ability to refer findings to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. The upgrade from preliminary to active means the Inspector General's investigators have found enough in the initial review to believe further investigation is warranted. Before we go into what the legal experts are saying about where this goes next, hit that subscribe button if you are not already subscribed to the public record. This is exactly the kind of story that the algorithm will not push to you unless you are already subscribed, because it does not fit the format of content that gets promoted automatically. We cover the documents, we cover the record, and we stay here for every development as it happens. Here is what the legal professionals are saying, and it is worth listening to carefully because the range of opinion is itself informative. At the more cautious end of the analytical spectrum, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree appeared on a national broadcast this week and made the point that senior government officials communicate through unofficial channels more frequently than the public assumes, and that the existence of an encrypted message to a person under investigation does not automatically establish that the content of that message was improper. The investigation of that person, Dupree noted, may have been entirely unrelated to anything within Patel's purview, and the communication may have been entirely innocent in nature. That is the strongest version of the defense, and it is a real defense. Metadata alone does not establish wrongdoing. But here is the problem with that defense, and it is the problem that makes the legal community's consensus lean considerably more concerned than dismissive. The defense depends on the content of the message, and the content of the message is classified, and the classification of that content means that the only people who currently know whether the message was innocent are the people whose conduct is under investigation. The Senate Judiciary Committee has formally requested declassification of the message content for purposes of congressional oversight. The Director's Office has opposed that request on national security grounds. The dispute over whether the message can be declassified is now before a federal judge in the District of Columbia. A ruling is expected within the next 2 weeks. That ruling will be one of the most important moments in this story, Because if the judge orders declassification and the content of the message is produced to the committee, the investigation either accelerates dramatically or it effectively ends. There is very little middle ground possible once the actual content is known. Georgetown constitutional law professor Rosa Brooks, who served in the Obama-era Defense Department and is not known as a partisan commentator, put the situation this way in a written analysis published this week. She wrote that the combination of a Day 1 protocol modification, an anomalous file access event on Day 11, and non-responsive production to a congressional subpoena, and a Day 43 communication to an active investigation target represents, in her assessment, a pattern that demands explanation. She did not conclude that wrongdoing had occurred. She concluded that the pattern is sufficiently serious that the absence of a full and transparent explanation from the director's office is itself a problem for institutional credibility. That framing, the absence of explanation as a problem, is the framing that is beginning to define how this story is being understood by people who follow institutional conduct closely and without partisan investment in the outcome. Now let us look at what happens next, because this is not a story that is heading toward a quiet administrative resolution. The mechanisms that are now in motion are formal, legal, and consequential, regardless of which political perspective you bring to the underlying facts. The Inspector General's active inquiry will produce a report. That report, under the Inspector General Act, must be provided to Congress. It cannot be suppressed by the director whose conduct it examines. It cannot be classified away from congressional oversight. When it arrives, and the timeline for an active inquiry of this complexity is typically 60 to 120 days, it will either corroborate the pattern that the subpoena documents suggest, or it will provide an alternative explanation for the entries in the log. The federal judge's ruling on declassification of the Day 43 message will resolve the central evidentiary question that currently prevents the Senate Judiciary Committee from knowing what the communication between Patel's aide and the investigation target actually said. The 3 senior FBI officials who have retained private counsel are, according to sources familiar with their situations, cooperating with the IG inquiry in ways that the director's office is not. When the people who work inside the institution are providing information to investigators that the institution's leader is withholding, the investigative picture tends to become clearer faster than official timelines suggest. The political dimension of this story is real, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Kash Patel's confirmation was a partisan battle, and the committee conducting this oversight has a Democratic majority. Those facts exist. They do not change what the record says. They do not change what Day 1, Day 11, and Day 43 show in the documentary record. The record is the record, regardless of the political context in which it is being examined. What is at stake here is not a partisan question. What is at stake is whether the director of the most powerful domestic law enforcement agency in the United States modified that agency's internal information architecture in ways that benefited specific interests that he should not have been protecting, and then used the authority of his office to prevent congressional examination of that modification. If that is what happened, it is a serious institutional crisis. If there is an innocent explanation, the mechanism for producing that explanation exists, and the director's office has, so far, declined to use it. The question that hangs over everything we have walked through today is simple, and it is the question that the next 60 days will answer. Did Kash Patel use the first 43 days of his directorship to reshape the FBI's internal information architecture in ways that protected specific interests that he should not have been protecting? The paper trail says something happened. It does not yet say what, but the paper trail is the beginning of every answer. And this paper trail is 43 days long, time-stamped to the minute, and now in the hands of investigators who have the authority to follow it wherever it leads. Subscribe to the Public Record. Turn on every notification, leave a comment telling us what you think the federal judge will decide on the declassification question, because that ruling is the pivot point for everything that follows. This story is not over. It has barely begun, and we will be here for every document, every filing, and every development as the record continues to build. When the IG report lands, we will break it down line by line. When the judge rules on declassification, we will be here within the hour. When the 3 senior FBI officials who hired private lawyers start providing testimony, we will have the full context ready. Stay with the public record. The record does not lie. And right now, the record is speaking very loudly.